Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been living in this place for about 2 years when I finally hit my breaking point. The apartment itself wasn't terrible, just your standard one bedroom with basic appliances and thin walls. But the landlord, that was a whole different story. The problem started small. A leaky faucet here, a broken outlet there, nothing major but stuff that needed fixing. I'd call him up, leave messages, send texts. When he actually picked up the phone, he always had the same response. He'd tell me how terrible that was and promise to get someone out there within the week. When I'd ask when I should expect them, he'd say he'd call me back with a time. He never called back. Weeks would go by and nothing would happen. I'd follow up again and get the same song and dance. The worst part was how sincere he sounded every single time, like he genuinely cared and was going to handle it immediately. But he never did. Things got really bad last winter. My heat stopped working in early December. I'm talking full-on freezing temperatures outside, and my apartment felt like an icebox. I called him the first day it happened. I explained that my heat wasn't working and it was getting really cold inside. He acted horrified and said he'd reach out to his heating guy right away, claiming this was top priority. I asked when someone could come and he said it should be within a day or two and promised to text me. No text came. A week went by. I called again. He gave me the same speech. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I was sleeping in sweatpants, 2 hoodies, and 3 blankets. I had space heaters running constantly, which jacked up my electric bill like crazy. Friends thought I was exaggerating until they came over and could see their breath inside my apartment. I finally got the heat fixed after a full month, but only because I threatened to call the city housing inspector. Suddenly, his heating guy had an opening that same day. Funny how that worked. That was the final straw. I started apartment hunting immediately and found a decent place across town. Better price, better location, and most importantly, a landlord who actually responded to emails within 24 hours. I gave my notice with a required 30 days, counted down the days until I could leave, and started packing. About a week before my move-out date, I got a call from the landlord. For once, he was actually calling me first instead of me chasing him down. He said he hoped everything was going well with the move and asked if he could do me a favor. I asked what he needed. He explained he was hiring a photographer to come take pictures of the apartment so he could get it listed right away. He wanted to know if I'd mind if the photographer came by while I was at work. Just needed an hour or so. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no just to be difficult, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was leaving anyway. I told him that was fine and asked when. He said the day after tomorrow, around 2 in the afternoon. He thanked me and said I'd been a great tenant. I almost laughed at that last part. A great tenant? I'd been the most patient tenant in the world, living without heat for a month and dealing with broken stuff for 2 years while he did basically nothing. But whatever. I was almost free. Then I had an idea. Nothing crazy, nothing destructive, just a little something to remember me by. The next day, the day before the photographer was scheduled to come, I got to work. My apartment was pretty small to begin with. The living room had a couch against one wall, an armchair against another, and a coffee table in between. There wasn't a ton of space, but it was workable if everything stayed where it belonged. I started moving furniture. Not far, just enough to make a difference. The couch that sat flush against the wall, I pulled it out about 8 inches toward the center of the room. The armchair? Same thing, moved it in about 8 inches. The coffee table stayed where it was, but now instead of having walking space around the furniture, everything felt squeezed together. The TV stand got pulled forward too. I stood back and looked at my handiwork. The living room suddenly looked absolutely tiny, like you'd have to turn sideways to squeeze between the couch and the coffee table. It gave off this cramped, claustrophobic vibe that made the whole place feel half the size it actually was. The bedroom and kitchen I left alone. No point in overdoing it. Just the living room was enough. The photographer came the next day while I was at work, snapped his pictures, and left. I moved out on schedule at the end of the week. The landlord did his walkthrough, gave me my deposit back minus some bogus cleaning fees I didn't bother fighting, and that was that. About a month later, I was curious. I looked up the listing online just to see what the place looked like in the photos. There it was, my old apartment, looking absolutely miserable. The living room shots made it look like a closet. Every picture showed furniture crammed together, barely any walking space, just this overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. I checked back every few weeks. The listing stayed up for months. Price dropped twice. Still no takers. I mean, who could blame them? Looking at those photos, you'd think you were moving into a shoebox with furniture wedged in at random. Eventually, someone must have rented it because the listing came down, but I like to think it sat empty for a good long while, costing my landlord rental income every month. 6 years ago, my cousin needed a place to stay. She was fresh out of a bad situation with her ex-roommate and didn't have much saved up. I had just moved to the city for work and had a two-bedroom apartment, so it seemed like perfect timing. We'd always been close growing up, spending summers together and calling each other at least once a week, even after we both moved away for college. When she asked if she could crash with me for a bit, I didn't think twice. That bit turned into 6 years. The arrangement was simple at first. She'd pay what she could afford while she got back on her feet. The city we live in isn't cheap. My one-bedroom goes for about $2,200 minimum, and a two-bedroom pushes closer to $3,000. She was working retail at the time and could manage $400 a month. I covered the rest plus utilities and most of the groceries. I made decent money in tech consulting, so it wasn't breaking the bank. Plus, she was family. That's what you do. The first couple years were fine. We had our own routines, our own lives. She'd occasionally cook dinner when our schedules lined up, and we'd watch movies on weekends. It felt easy and comfortable, like having your best friend as a roommate. But somewhere around year 4, things started feeling off. She'd get weird when I mentioned going out with friends. She started asking a lot of questions about where I was going and who I'd be with. I brushed it off as her being protective or bored. Then she began making comments about the women I dated. Nothing outright hostile, just little jabs here and there. Too made up, too loud, too quiet, too something. The breaking point came one night when I got home around 3 a.m. I'd been on a date that went really well. We grabbed dinner, walked around downtown, ended up talking at a coffee shop until they closed. I was in a good mood, texting her goodnight as I unlocked our apartment door. That good mood died the second I walked into my bedroom. There was food everywhere. Spaghetti sauce on my pillows, meatballs ground into my comforter, noodles stuck to the wall above my headboard. My dresser had marinara handprints all over it. I stood there staring, trying to process what I was seeing. Then she appeared in my doorway with her arms crossed. She said I made her waste her time. When I asked what she meant, she said she'd cooked dinner for us and I didn't come home. She said, I didn't even text that I'd be late. I told her I didn't know she was cooking because she never said anything. She shot back that she shouldn't have to tell me because we lived together. I asked her if that meant she destroyed my room. She said maybe next time I'd think about someone other than myself. She walked away like that was a completely normal response. I spent 2 hours cleaning marinara sauce out of my carpet at 4 in the morning. That night, I lay on my strip bed with my clothes smelling like Italian food and realized something was deeply wrong. This wasn't cousin behavior. This was how a jealous girlfriend acts when you stay out late. I started thinking back on all those little comments and weird questions with fresh perspective, and suddenly everything clicked into a very uncomfortable picture. When our lease came up for renewal 2 months later, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I'd also been getting serious with someone I'd been seeing for a few months, and she'd mentioned wanting to move in together. The timing felt right to make some changes. I sat my cousin down and tried to approach it carefully. I said the lease was up next month and suggested we look for a new place closer to my office since my commute was killing me. She said she didn't want to move that far from her work. I pointed out that her work was downtown and anywhere we moved would be close to downtown. She insisted she liked this neighborhood. I shifted gears and mentioned that rent was going up again, so I was hoping she could maybe cover $600 instead of $400 because I wanted to start saving more. She said she couldn't afford that. I reminded her she got promoted 3 months ago. She said she had other expenses. When I asked what expenses since I pay for groceries, she said that wasn't my business. The conversation went in circles. Every suggestion I made got shut down. Then I mentioned my girlfriend potentially moving in, and her whole face changed. She said absolutely not. I asked why. She said this was our place and she wasn't living with some random girl I'd been dating for 5 minutes. I said it had been 7 months. She said she didn't care if it had been 7 years. My girlfriend wasn't moving in, and that was non-negotiable. The way she said non-negotiable, like she had any actual say in the matter, was what did it. I said I decided to get my own place, and my girlfriend would be moving in with me. She could either find roommates or move back with her parents. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the month. Moving day was silent and awkward. She took her stuff without a word and left without saying goodbye. Then came 4 months of nothing. No calls, no texts, blocked on social media. Family asked me what happened, and I gave them the short version. Most of them understood. A few thought I was being harsh, but nobody pushed it. The relationship with my girlfriend lasted about 8 months before we realized we wanted different things. It was amicable. We stayed friends. Then I ran into my high school ex at a friend's wedding, and we started talking again. We dated for 7 years, from sophomore year until we broke up in college, when she moved across the country for grad school. We'd both grown and changed, but reconnecting felt natural. We started dating again. Here's where it gets messy. My high school ex and my cousin used to be best friends. They had a falling out years ago over something I was never fully clear on. I knew it was ancient history that had nothing to do with me. 2 weeks after my ex and I made things official on social media, my cousin called me for the first time in months. She asked if I was really dating her. I said it was good to hear from her too. She told me to answer the question. I said yes, we were dating. She asked if this was how I was repaying her after everything she did for me. I asked what she was talking about. She said I've been choosing other women over her since the second I decided my love life was more important than our relationship. I said we were cousins. She said that's not what she meant and I knew it. I said I genuinely didn't. She said I threw away 6 years of living together, of being there for each other, just so I could play house with someone who wasn't even good enough for me the first time. She accused me of picking my girlfriend specifically to hurt her. I said I didn't pick anyone to hurt her and that I was dating someone I cared about. She said I betrayed her. She hung up before I could respond. Since then, family gatherings have been incredibly uncomfortable. She shows up looking miserable and leaves early. She won't be in the same room as me if I bring my girlfriend. Last month, my aunt pulled me aside at the barbecue. My aunt asked if I'd consider coming to events without my girlfriend. I asked if she meant without my girlfriend specifically. She said just for a while until my cousin felt better. I asked what my cousin needed to feel better about. My aunt said I knew this was hard for her and that she was family, so maybe I could just give her some space. I asked if giving her space meant not bringing my girlfriend to family events. My aunt said it would make things easier for everyone. My uncle jumped in and said my cousin was going through a lot right now and it would be nice if I could be supportive. I looked at them both standing there asking me to accommodate this bizarre situation like it was completely reasonable. I said, let me make sure I understand, then asked them if they wanted me to hide my relationship because my cousin, who I lived with platonically for 6 years, was upset that I'm dating someone. My aunt started to say something about how I was putting it, but I cut her off and asked how else I should put it. Nobody had an answer. I brought my girlfriend to Thanksgiving last week. My cousin left within 30 minutes of us arriving. My mom got 3 different phone calls about it. Half the family thinks I'm being cruel. The other half is uncomfortable but staying quiet. My girlfriend asked if we should just skip Christmas to avoid drama. I told her no. This is weird, and I'm not pretending it's normal anymore. I was about 20 minutes into my drive home when I noticed the sedan ahead of me swerving slightly between lanes. Not enough to be dangerous yet, but enough to make me pay attention. Traffic was moderate, and I'd been lost in thought about grabbing takeout for dinner when the car's erratic movement caught my eye. When I thought maybe the driver was texting or messing with the radio, I got a little closer and saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a guy in the passenger seat, and he was hitting the driver. Not once, not twice. He kept doing it, smacking her head, her shoulder, gesturing wildly while she tried to keep the car steady. The woman was struggling to maintain control of the vehicle while this man just kept going at her. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to process it. This wasn't a small disagreement or someone getting worked up. This was violent and happening right in front of me while she was operating a 2-ton vehicle. I fumbled for my phone and managed to start recording while keeping one hand on the wheel. It wasn't easy trying to film and drive at the same time, but I needed proof of what was happening. I moved into the lane beside them to get a better angle, and that's when I saw her face clearly. She looked terrified. Her eyes were wide and she kept flinching every time he raised his hand again. The guy looked like he was in his 40s, built heavy, and clearly didn't care that they were in moving traffic. He was screaming something at her, but I couldn't hear the words through the closed windows. Whatever he was saying, it was making her cry harder. The car swerved again, this time crossing the white line into the shoulder for a second before she corrected it. A truck behind them laid on the horn. That's when I knew I had to call someone immediately. I dropped my phone into my lap and hit the speaker button before dialing. The operator answered on the second ring and asked what my emergency was. I explained that I was on Route 12 heading west, and there was a man in a car physically attacking the driver while she was trying to drive. I told her they were all over the road and it was getting dangerous. She asked me to describe the vehicle. I said it was a silver sedan, looked like a Honda or Toyota, and told her to hold on while I got closer to read the plate number. I sped up slightly to pull up beside them again. The man was still going at her, and now he was yelling loud enough that I could see his face turning red even through the window. He grabbed her arm at one point and jerked it, causing the car to veer sharply to the left. The woman screamed and yanked the wheel back just in time to avoid hitting the concrete divider. My heart was pounding. This guy was going to get them both killed. Or worse, he was going to get someone else killed. The woman was crying. I could see tears streaming down her face as she tried to focus on the road. I gave the operator the plate number and described exactly where we were and which direction we were heading. She asked me to confirm the mile marker we were passing. I looked and told her we just passed mile marker 47. She told me units were being dispatched and to stay on the line but keep my distance if possible. I dropped back a bit but kept the car in sight. No way was I losing them before the cops showed up. A few minutes passed that felt like forever. The sedan kept weaving and at one point nearly sideswiped a pickup truck in the right lane. Horns blared around us. Other drivers were starting to notice something was wrong. Some were slowing down to give the sedan more space. The man inside kept hitting her, over and over. I wanted to pull them over myself but knew that would probably make things worse. The operator stayed on the line with me asking for updates on their location every 30 seconds or so. I kept narrating where we were and what was happening. Finally, I saw the flash of blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. 2 patrol cars were coming up fast, weaving through traffic. They pulled up behind the sedan and hit their sirens. The car in front of me started to slow down, but it took longer than it should have. The woman was probably panicking, or the man was preventing her from pulling over right away. I could see him gesturing angrily inside the car. Eventually, she guided the car onto the shoulder and stopped. I pulled over about 50 feet behind them. The cops were already out of their vehicles, approaching with caution. I figured they might need my testimony or the video I'd recorded, so I stayed put with my hazards on. The operator asked if I was safe and told me officers were on scene. I thanked her and hung up. The man got out of the passenger side and immediately started shouting at the officers. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but his body language was aggressive. He was pointing at the woman, then at the cops, throwing his arms around. One cop was talking to the woman through the driver's side window while 2 others dealt with him. She hadn't gotten out of the car yet. She was still sitting there gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding her together. Then he saw me. I was standing by my car, phone still in hand. His face twisted with rage and he started charging in my direction. My heart jumped into my throat. This guy was solid and looked ready to kill me. I barely had time to step back before I heard one of the officers yelling at him to stop. He didn't stop. He kept coming, shoving past one of the cops who tried to grab his arm. The officer stumbled backward from the force. I saw the second officer reach for something on his belt, and then there was a sharp crackling sound. The man went rigid and collapsed onto the pavement, twitching. They tasered him. Thank God they tasered him. Two officers rushed over and rolled him onto his stomach, cuffing his hands behind his back while he groaned and spat curses into the asphalt. He was still trying to thrash around even with the cuffs on. One officer kept a knee on his back to hold him down. The third officer jogged over to me and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and that I'd called it in. I mentioned I had video of the man hitting her while she was driving. He said they were going to need that and asked if I could stick around to give a statement. I nodded and handed over my phone so they could transfer the footage. He took a quick look at it and shook his head. He said this was one of the worst cases of road rage assault he'd seen. While they processed everything, I watched them help the woman out of the car. She was shaking, still crying, and one of the officers wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, even though it wasn't that cold out. She could barely stand on her own. Another officer had to support her weight as they walked her over to sit on the guardrail. An ambulance showed up a few minutes later. The paramedics checked her over for injuries while one of the officers took her statement. She had visible marks on her face and arms where he'd hit her. The man was hauled into the back of a patrol car, still shouting obscenities. Even from where I was standing 50 feet away, I could hear him screaming threats. The officer near me radioed something in and said they were adding charges for assault on an officer and attempted assault on a witness. That would be me. I gave my full statement to one of the officers, describing everything I'd seen from the moment I first noticed the erratic driving to when he charged at me. He asked me detailed questions about the timeline and what I'd observed. I told him about how the man had grabbed her arm and caused the car to nearly hit the divider. The officer wrote everything down carefully. He told me I'd done the right thing calling it in. He said it could have been a lot worse if she'd crashed. He mentioned that domestic violence situations that happen in vehicles are especially dangerous because the abuser has the victim trapped with no escape. I just nodded. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. The officer asked if I needed medical attention or felt unsafe. I told him I was okay, just shaken up. He handed me a card with a case number on it and said a detective might reach out for a follow-up interview. Eventually, they told me I was free to go but might be contacted later if they needed additional testimony. The officer thanked me again for getting involved. He said a lot of people would have just kept driving. I got back in my car and sat there for a minute trying to calm down before pulling back into traffic. My phone was still recording when they tasered him. I stopped the recording and saved it. The whole thing had probably only been 25 or 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. When I finally drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror one last time and saw the woman being helped into the ambulance. The man was still in the back of the patrol car, and a tow truck was pulling up to take the sedan. I hoped she'd be okay. I hoped she'd press charges and get a restraining order. I hoped she'd get away from that guy for good. The next morning, I got a call from a detective who wanted to set up a time to review my statement and the video evidence. She told me the man was being held without bail on multiple charges including domestic assault, reckless endangerment, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. She said my video was crucial evidence because it showed the ongoing assault and how dangerous the situation had become. I agreed to come in that afternoon to sign the official statement. When I hung up, I realized I still had that sick feeling in my stomach from the night before, but at least I knew I'd done something that mattered. I've been delivering stock feed and hay to hobby farms around the area for a while when this whole mess started. Most customers were pretty easygoing, but there were always a few who made things interesting. This customer had been ordering from us for about a year or so by the time this happened. She was in her mid-60s and had that classic attitude of someone who'd been doing things one way for decades and wasn't about to change. Every time I showed up to deliver, there'd be some comment about how young people don't know anything or how she'd been handling livestock since before I was born. You know the type. We'd butted heads a few times over delivery schedules and product recommendations, but nothing too serious. Just the usual friction that comes with someone who thinks their way is the only way. The reason I was even out at her place that day was because of the drought. It had been a brutal summer. Everything was dried up, and all the hobby farmers were scrambling to stockpile hay before prices went through the roof. She called in a massive order, 60 bales. Usually people ordered maybe 20 at a time, so this was going to be a proper workout. I loaded up the truck early that morning and headed out to her property. The drive took about 40 minutes through winding country roads, past brown fields and struggling pastures. When I pulled up to her gate, I already knew it was going to be a long day. Her hay shed was set back from the driveway, tucked behind her house with no easy access for the truck. I'd have to haul every single bale by hand across about 30 meters of uneven ground. The sun was absolutely merciless that day. 33 degrees and not a single cloud to provide even a moment of shade. I parked as close as I could get and started unloading. Each bale weighed about 20 kilos, and after the first 10 my shirt was already soaked through with sweat. I had a system for stacking hay that I'd learned from an old farmer who'd been in the business for 40 years. You stack them in alternating patterns so they interlock, kind of like bricks in a wall. First layer would be 2 bales side by side, then a gap, then 2 more bales. Second layer would be 1 bale covering the gap, then 2 bales covering where the first layer connected, then another single bale. It created a stable structure that wouldn't topple over when someone pulled bales from the top. I was about 15 bales in, building my first stack, when she came walking over from her house. She immediately told me I was stacking it all wrong and that I'd never fit all the bales in the shed that way. I tried explaining that this method ensured the bales stayed stable when she pulled from the top and that stacking them in straight lines would just make them fall over. She cut me off and said she'd been storing hay since before I was in nappies and that I needed to stack them in straight rows. I pushed back, explaining it wasn't safe and that the whole thing would collapse when she took hay from the top. She wasn't having it. She told me to either stack them the way she wanted or she'd call my boss and have him send someone who actually knew what they were doing. Then she literally started pulling apart the stack I'd already built, yanking bales off and lining them up in straight rows. 3 bales in a line right next to each other. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching me like a school teacher, making sure I followed her instructions. I knew exactly what was going to happen. Physics doesn't care about how long someone's been doing something wrong. But fine. If she wanted to be stubborn about it, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. I spent the next hour stacking all 60 bales in perfectly straight rows, just like she wanted. 5 bales high, 3 bales across per row. The stack looked impressive, I'll give it that. But it was also incredibly unstable. Every time I placed a bale on the top row, the whole structure wobbled. It was like building a house of cards in a wind tunnel. By the time I got to the last bale, I was exhausted, sunburned, and thoroughly annoyed. The stack was visibly leaning to one side. I held the final bale out to her and told her she could put this last one up. She waved me off and said she'd feed that one out tonight instead. She seemed pleased with herself, probably thinking she'd put some uppity young guy in his place. She waved goodbye and headed back toward her house. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and was just about to pull away when I heard her yell out a very loud curse. I looked back at the shed and saw the entire top half of the stack had collapsed. She was on the ground, buried under about 10 bales of hay, flailing around trying to push them off. I jumped out and ran over, pulling bales off her one by one. She was sputtering and cursing, hay stuck in her hair and down her shirt. Once I got her uncovered, I helped her to her feet. She was rolling her shoulder, clearly in pain but trying to play it off. I pulled out my phone and called my boss. I told him I was going to have to restack all this hay. He just sighed and said she'd never learn her lesson. I hung up and started pulling bales apart again. This time she didn't say a word, just stood there rubbing her shoulder and watching me work. I explained the whole process as I went, why the alternating pattern distributed weight better, how it prevented the kind of collapse that had just buried her, the basic engineering principles that made one method safe and the other dangerous. When I finally finished the second stack, which held perfectly stable, she cleared her throat and admitted that she was glad at least one of us knew what they were doing. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. And honestly, watching her get buried under her own stubbornness was satisfying enough. I grew up pretty close to my husband's family, especially his uncle. He was one of those people who just had a way of making everyone feel welcome. His house was always open, and he'd have these big cookouts every summer where the whole family would show up. My husband spent a lot of his childhood there, and even after we got married, we'd visit him at least once a month. When he got sick last year, it hit everyone hard. Cancer doesn't care how good a person you are. His granddaughter took care of him through the whole thing. She was only 23, but she moved back home, took a leave from her job, and basically put her entire life on hold to make sure he was comfortable. She'd take him to appointments, cook his meals, help him with everything. The rest of the family would visit, but she was there every single day. Before he passed, he made sure his will was ironclad. Everything went to her. The house, his savings, his truck, all of it. Nobody questioned it because she'd earned it 10 times over. The funeral was rough, but we all tried to be there for her. She seemed to be holding it together as well as anyone could. Then, about a week after the funeral, her father showed up. I need to back up a bit here. Her father had been out of the picture for years, like completely gone. Her grandfather, the uncle who just passed, had gotten a protective order against him 5 years ago. There was this whole incident where he showed up drunk, demanding money, and it got physical. After that, the courts said he couldn't come within 500 feet of the property. Nobody in the family had heard from him since. Her mom had divorced him when she was little, and everyone was better off for it. But somehow he found out about the will. She called us the day he showed up. She was shaking and I could hear it in her voice even over the phone. She told us he'd been banging on the door, yelling about how he deserved half of everything. He was saying he was next of kin, that she couldn't just steal his inheritance. She didn't open the door, just called the police. They came and reminded him about the protective order, told him if he came back he'd be arrested. My husband was ready to drive over there, but she said the police handled it. Then the texts started. He sent her these long messages about how she was being selfish, how family should stick together, how his own father had turned everyone against him. Then he'd switch tactics and try to be all sweet, saying he just needed help getting back on his feet, asking for just $10,000 to start over. When she didn't respond, he threatened to take her to court, said he'd fight the will, that she'd end up with nothing by the time his lawyers were done. She showed me the texts. There were dozens of them, some angry, some guilt-trippy, some threatening. It was exhausting just reading them. She ended up having to block his number and contacted the lawyer who'd handled the will. The lawyer sent him a letter basically saying he had no legal ground to stand on, and any further harassment would result in additional legal action. Then yesterday she got a message from her second cousin. This was a guy she barely knew. They'd maybe been at the same family gatherings a handful of times over the years, but they'd never really talked. He was from the branch of the family that everyone kind of avoided. You know the type, the ones who only show up when they need something. The message asked if he and his girlfriend could move into her grandfather's house, not rent it, just move in. They said they were desperate to get away from the rest of their family because everyone they were living with was dragging them down. They said they had no money but promised they'd be great tenants. She screenshot the message and sent it to our family group chat. We were all just stunned. My husband called her immediately and asked if the cousin had really just asked to live there for free. She confirmed that was exactly what he'd asked. No mention of rent, no timeline, nothing. My husband asked if she even knew this guy, and she admitted not really, maybe having talked to him twice in her entire life. I asked why he would think this was okay to ask, and she said she had no idea, but that it got worse. She sent another screenshot. The cousin had sent a follow-up message explaining that the reason they had no money was because neither of them had jobs. They were between opportunities and just needed a place to stay while they figured things out. Then he mentioned, almost casually, that they were still on good terms with her father. That's when it clicked for all of us. My husband said they'd let her father move in too, that it was the whole plan. She agreed, saying that was exactly what she thought. They were buddies with him, they had no money, they needed a place to stay. She said she'd bet anything he put them up to this. I asked what she was going to tell them. She said she'd already responded and told them no. She was polite about it, but made it clear the house wasn't available. The cousin tried to push back. He sent another message saying she had this big house all to herself and it seemed selfish not to help family, that her grandfather would have wanted her to help family in need. That last part really got to her, using her grandfather like that. She sent one final message. She told him that her grandfather had made his wishes very clear, that he'd known exactly who he wanted to have the house and why, and that his decision would be respected. She said she hoped they figured out their situation, but the house wasn't an option. Then she blocked him too. When she told me about it later, she seemed tired but relieved. She asked if it was wrong that she didn't feel bad. I told her not even a little bit that she didn't owe anyone anything. She talked about the audacity of it all, how her father threatens to sue her, then sends his buddies to try to guilt-trip her into giving them free housing. She wondered if they thought she was stupid. My husband laughed and said apparently they did, but they learned otherwise. She ended up changing all the locks on the house and installing security cameras, just to be safe. The lawyer assured her that the will was solid and nobody could challenge it successfully, but she wanted the extra peace of mind. Last I heard, her father was still blocked, and the cousin had finally stopped trying to reach out. She's been slowly going through the house, deciding what to keep and what to donate, taking her time with it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.